Hey y'all, and welcome back to my channel. In this tutorial we are going to make some floral peekaboo staplers. Now this trend has been going around since right before school started, and I told myself I was not going to jump on it. Normally I don't make the really small projects, I stick to tumblers and the larger ones. And then I saw my friend Brooke over at Cami Page Boutique had a attachment made specifically for these staplers in her shop, and I thought, well, you know, better late than never, right? So her attachment is made specifically to fit the Amazon basic staplers. They're good quality and they are inexpensive. The Amazon basic stapler is just a clean, sleek design, so it's pretty easy to work with. So we're not going to epoxy the entire thing, we're just doing the top. So I disassembled it, put everything back into the box so I would not misplace it, and made sure that it fit on top of my attachment perfectly. And then we are going to take a piece of 320 grit sandpaper and just rough this surface up a little bit to give our epoxy and our paints something to grab a hold of. Now you'll notice that I am taking the sandpaper over the edge. That way my epoxy has somewhere to seal. The same concept as leaving a little bit of the stainless exposed on a tumbler. Throughout this process, I'm going to avoid putting paints or glitter onto the edges of this, like on the curved edge, simply for the fact that on my final coats, I want that epoxy to go over my design and onto that black plastic so it can give it a nice good seal. This is going to have a lot of pressure put on it when stapling, so the last thing I want is a customer to be stapling some papers and the epoxy crack and pull away from the side. We are working with two staplers, and for this one I'm using banana cream and white COLORFLEX paints from COLORFLEX. These are high quality, very pigmented, as you can see, paint, primer, and glue in one. If I'm using it as a glue, I will do a base coat and then do a second coat, and of course pour my glitter on top. But in this case, I just want to do one coat of paint, and then we're going to use the epoxy method, since we have to use that for our other one, to apply our glitters. We're going to use a teeny tiny amount of epoxy and pull that around on the top of the stapler, not going over the edge. I do not want my glitter to adhere to the edges or over the sides of this stapler. I want to leave that so that my epoxy can seal over the edge once I have completed my design. This attachment from Cami Page Boutique slides right on to the PVC that goes to your turner, and it has a little dial on the side to tighten it on so it doesn't twist and turn as you're working with it. And I also have the turner arm stand at the bottom that typically is used as a drying rack, or many different things for tumblers, but in this case, since it is a Y shape, it is working with the stapler tool to help keep the stapler facing straight up instead of rolling around or constantly having to attach it to my turner while I'm working on the design and avoid it falling over. I only have one of these attachments. Real smart, right? To try to make two at the same time and only have one attachment, but I made it work, and it was really difficult to hold on to this without getting epoxy all over my hands. So I'm definitely going to go to Cami Page and grab me another one of these, because even though I don't typically make these small things to have in shop, I really think these would be awesome to have in my store for office co-workers and teachers around Christmas time. For this one, we are using Mulberry Street from Glitter Dip Sips. I am actually making these staplers for my mom's, well, my mom and my mother-in-law. My mom's favorite color is yellow and my mother-in-law's is purple. And Mulberry Street has some really pretty, like, mulberry purpley flakes in it, so I thought it would be nice to accent the florals that we are using. And for the yellow, we are using Bollywood from PDB Creative Studio. And as you can see, it is an absolutely beautiful yellow that's really going to pop whenever we do our peekaboo. So after we have our glitter on our stapler tops, I'm going to go around it with a gloved hand and pat it down. And when doing so, I'm also going to go around those bottom edges and just kind of push off or flake off any of the pieces of glitter that might be hanging over the edge, so we don't have to take a craft knife around the edge once we have put epoxy over top. Flattening the glitter is going to minimize the amount of epoxy that you have to put on these to get them smooth. I used Artistry's 1:1 ratio fast set epoxy. This epoxy dries incredibly fast. After 30 minutes, you can do a second coat. If you feel like you need to sand, I can actually sand at the 4 to 6 hour mark and then do another coat of epoxy. And within 2 hours, I'm able to handle and apply decals. There have been many times that I have actually completed projects in just a day with multiple layers of epoxy and decals. And you can also use their fast set as a top coat, and that helps tremendously as well. So for these, I did 2 thin coats of epoxy. I did 1 coat, sanded very, very lightly, and trimmed off any little pokey pieces that might have been showing over the edge. And then I did 1 additional layer of epoxy and then allowed that to dry for about 4 to 6 hours and went in with some high grit, which was about 320 to 400 sandpaper, smooth those out really well, and then I'm going to apply our floral stencil. I actually just cut these stencils to the exact length of the stapler top and then put them on sideways. That just helps me know that I'm going to get really good coverage with that peekaboo. I didn't want to take it all the way to the edge, and for these stencils I usually just avoid weighting them and lift them completely off of the backing, leaving the majority of those little pieces inside that you would have to weed out behind, and then you can weed out those little pieces that remain inside of your stencil once you apply onto your project. I am not by any means saying that it is easy. I have used these florals so many times I could probably do it in my sleep. So if you choose to remove them from the backing without weeding like I did, just really go slow. Make sure that they don't overlap or fold into each other whenever you're pulling them off, and also make sure you're using a temporary or removable vinyl or a stencil vinyl so it's not super sticky when you're trying to remove it. So the florals that we are using for these are the rub-on transfers from Southern Belle Glitter. We're going to be using the Spring Gardens, I believe, and the peachy pink colored ones from the Brittany Barnes Boutique collection. We're going to do Wine Stain from Color Shot and Shark. These paints are incredible. They are at Michael's and some Walmarts. I have heard that there's stock issues at most Walmart stores, but they are in stock at Michael's. They go on so well with the first coat, and it's low odor. It's not super strong like the other paint brands. And that first coat gives you excellent coverage, and really by the time I make it from spray painting outside to inside my craft room, it's basically already dry and I can move right along to the next steps. I haven't had any issues as of yet of any epoxy repelling from the paint fumes not being able to gas off, but normally I am hustling trying to get these projects completed and get these tutorials out for y'all. So I usually spray paint, give it just enough time to dry, and then I am moving into adding on my epoxy or decals. So once we have allowed our paint to dry, we're going to remove that temporary vinyl that we laid down for our stencil. Many of you have commented or asked, is there an easier way to weed this? It's difficult, and unfortunately that answer is no. If there was an easier way, I promise I would have found it by now, and I'm constantly testing out different temporary vinyls, and I have yet to find one that just really pops off easily other than stencil vinyl, and I really don't like how it cuts. And it just seems to not really stick to the projects as well as the temporary vinyl. I know that's kind of the point, and it does remove easier, but I find that I have some paints or alcohol inks, whatever I'm using, seep underneath, and I really like those crisp, clean lines. Y'all know my love for Tech Wrap Craft, and I have brought it up to them and worked with them on developing a really good quality stencil vinyl, so hopefully they will have that out for us sometime soon or in the near future. After I remove my stencil, I'm going to go in with some acetone and remove the excess paint that went over those edges. I'm not concerned with any of the overspray that's up inside, which really didn't get any because again, we didn't have to do a heavy paint coat with the Color Shot paints. So I'm just going to clean those edges up. So again, once we add on our stencils, our final coats of epoxy will be able to go over our design and seal with that plastic on the edge. We're going to add on a thin coat of epoxy because we want a glossy surface to add on our transfers to. This is one of my favorite packs from Southern Belle Glitter. I have previously used these on a coffee mug. And what I have left is some of the smaller elements that you can use on small projects like this. So I just trimmed out some of the flowers that I felt matched the design and that I wanted to use. And we're going to apply them one by one. These transfers are incredible to use. They're really easy to work with. They are delicate and you don't want to put your fingers on the back of the actual transfer, otherwise it will stick to your hand. So you want to put it on your project, and then once it's on there, it is on there. So you'll see me a lot take the flower or the leaves without removing the back, as I'm doing here, sort of place them so I have a visual of where I want them to lay, and then I will remove the back and then press them down gently. And then it comes with a wooden tool that helps you really rub those on and put some pressure on there to apply the transfer. You're going to want to get those pressed down really well, and then as you are removing that plastic, sort of pull it towards you just a bit and then lift up very gently going the opposite way, and that will help you remove it without damaging your transfer. And then once I pull that plastic piece off, most of the time I do go over it just with my finger, or you can use a really soft cloth and just sort of press it down even more to make sure that those edges are really sealed onto your project. I have had lots of questions on how to remove these from the project, like if you didn't like the design or if you have one that you placed in the wrong spot. I have used Goo Gone, which is a latex paint or residue cleanup, and it really helps remove these without damaging the glossy surface of your project. The only thing with Goo Gone is that it is an oil, so you really have to go in with some Dawn dish detergent, or you can go in with alcohol and further remove that oil after you get the residue from your transfer off of your project. Otherwise, your epoxy will repel from whatever you're working on if there's any oily residue left behind. Now, I wanted to add on some names to these, and just so happened my mom and my mother-in-law both are Teresa, so it was really easy to make those names for these. However, I should have put a layer of epoxy on and then added my decals. You really don't want to use transfer tape over top of these rub-on transfers or it will remove. And for whatever reason right here, I went to add on the epoxy and said, oh, I forgot to add the names. I added the names on, and I did on the purple one remove some of the transfer, but luckily it was just a tiny spot and I was able to go over with a duplicate of that same flower that I had and correct it. Just keep in mind whenever you are working with your transfers, don't use transfer tape over top of it. Put a layer of epoxy in between so that your transfer tape does not remove your beautiful rub-on transfers that you have just spent so much time on. I did 2 final coats of epoxy. For the first coat, again, we added in a tiny bit of filter from COLORFLEX. It's an ultra fine, super sparkly glitter. It gives a really nice shimmer to my last coats. And on your final coats, you're going to want to take the epoxy just slightly over the edge. That way you are sealing in all of your design to that plastic that you sanded at the very beginning. This is going to seal in this design just as if you would leave some of the stainless exposed at the top of your tumbler. After this is completely dry, then it is time to reassemble, and these are complete. I am really happy with the way that these turned out. Since I am late to this party, I wanted to do something that really is for anyone. There's lots of designs and tutorials out there already for like pencils and rulers, something for a teacher. So I thought it would be nice to do something that is really for any time of the year and for anyone. Let me know which one is your favorite down in the comments. As always, all of the materials that I have used will be listed in the description below with some coupon codes for y'all. Don't forget to join our Facebook group. We have lots of fun and giveaways in there. Give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it, and subscribe to our channel. Hit the bell in the corner to be notified anytime a new tutorial drops. That is all for today. Thank you all so much, and we will see you next time.